As the type of one of the 3 starter Pokemon every generation, the Grass type is one of the most iconic in the Pokemon TCG. As such, the type has a history as long as the game itself, with many incredible competitive Pokemon over the years. And kicking off this list at number 10, we have Vespiquen. This Pokemon was an absurdly efficient attacker thanks to its Be Revenge attack. For 2 colorless energy, Be Revenge dealt 20 damage plus 10 more for each Pokemon card in your discard pile. Vespiquen decks were built to enable Be Revenge to deal as much damage as fast as possible, with most commonly played Pokemon EX, like Yveltal EX for example, having around 170 to 180 HP. Players using Vespiquen often ran upwards of 27 to 30 Pokemon just to make sure they could hit the discard pile easily. In its initial standard format, Battle Compressor provided a way to put 3 Pokemon straight from your deck into the discard pile as an item card. Pokemon like Unknown let you discard itself from your bench to draw a card with its Farewell Letter ability, allowing you to get deeper into your deck while boosting damage. The deck used so many Pokemon cards that could take advantage of many great tech options. Zebstrika allowed you to easily KO to the aforementioned Yveltal EX even without a discard pile set up, since its Crashing Bolt attack did a boosted 110 damage before weakness, and Yveltal had a fighting resistance. If you wanted to need less Pokemon in your discard pile by hitting for a certain type weakness, Flareon and Vaporeon could add the Fire and Water type to Vespiquen respectively. Vespiquen, being a single prize attacker, meant that trading prize cards favorably into it would be extremely difficult depending on the matchup, as Be Revenge was usually capable of taking easy 2 prize KOs against Pokemon EX. Vespiquen's Be Revenge also had synergy with a lot of generically playable supporters and item cards. Professor Sycamore, one of the best draw supporters in the game, provided a way to discard a handful of Pokemon while drawing a fresh new 7 cards. Ultra Ball could discard any 2 cards to get whatever Pokemon you needed out of the deck, such as Shaymin EX for its setup ability to draw even more cards. Since Be Revenge cost 2 colorless energy, double colorless energy paid its full cost. Even after Vespiquen rotated out of the standard format, these synergies meant it saw continued usage in the expanded format alongside Flareon, whose Vengeance attack was functionally identical to Be Revenge. While Vespiquen did eventually fall out of favor in Expanded, the card's strength across both Standard and Expanded earned it a spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Rowlet and Exeggutor GX. This Tag Team Pokemon GX earns a spot on this list due to its Super Growth attack. For no energy cost, Super Growth lets you evolve one of your Grass-type Pokemon into its appropriate Stage 1 evolution from the deck. Then, you could evolve that Stage 1 Pokemon into its appropriate Stage 2 Pokemon. Notably, you could use this attack to evolve a Pokemon on your first turn, or the first turn you put it into play. For 2 Grass and 1 Colorless Energy, Calming Hurricane dealt 150 damage and healed 30 damage from itself. Its GX attack very rarely came up, so we won't talk about it here. Super Growth lets the Rowlet and Exeggutor GX players break a fundamental rule of the game. Normally, you can't evolve a Pokemon during your first turn, or the first turn you put it into play. Since Super Growth ignores these restrictions, it allows you to power out certain Stage 2 Pokemon way earlier than you otherwise would be able to. In the standard format, Super Growth was mainly used to quickly set up Rillaboom. Once per turn, Rillaboom's Voltage Beat ability lets you attach up to 2 Grass Energy cards from your deck to one of your Pokemon, quickly powered up Rowlet and Exeggutor GX's Calming Hurricane. Getting both Rowlet and Exeggutor GX and a Grookey into play on the first turn was trivial for decks thanks to Tag Call and Guzma and Hala. The former lets you add any 2 tag team cards from your deck to your hand, and the latter lets you search out a Stadium, Special Energy, and a Pokemon Tool card. With a single Tag Call, you could search out a Rowlet and Exeggutor GX alongside Guzma and Hala. Then Guzma and Hala could search for Capture Energy, which in turn put a Grookey onto your bench. There were many ways to set up the deck's main strategy on the very first turn, giving it an incredible level of consistency. But although the setup was incredibly consistent to get on your first turn, the strategy struggled into Reshiram and Charizard GX, one of the best decks at the time. This meant it sadly never took off in the standard format. In the expanded format though, Rowlet and Exeggutor GX saw incredible success due to its strength at enabling powerful grass types as frequently as possible. In the expanded format, this card's main partner was Vileplume. With its irritating pollen ability, Vileplume prevented both players from playing item cards from their hand. A Vileplume on your first turn could win the game on the spot. Playing irritating pollen Vileplume also meant that Super Growth could access 2 other Vileplume cards if they needed the utility. Disgusting pollen Vileplume prevented basic Pokemon from attacking as long as it was your active Pokemon, while Vileplume GX healed 30 damage from each of your Pokemon every turn. Setting up item locks on your first turn is so fundamentally powerful that this strategy still sees some play in the expanded format 4 years after it was first released. And at number 8, we have Jumpluff. This Pokemon's mass attack deals 10 damage for each Pokemon in play for only a single grass energy. Also, for one grass energy, Leaf Guard dealt 30 damage and reduced all damage Jumpluff took during your opponent's turn by 30. Jumpluff was the main focus of an aggressive deck during the 2010 and early 2011 standard metagame. Mass attack, reaching upwards of 120 damage if both players had the full 6 Pokemon in play, allowed it to one-hit KO many meta-relevant Pokemon like Flygon and Garchomp C level X. If a high HP Pokemon was out of one-hit KO range, Jumpluff decks often ran a plethora of damage modifiers like Plus Power, Crobat G, or Expert Bell. In cases where it wasn't possible for Jumpluff to knock out an opposing Pokemon, Leaf Guard helped set up the KO for the next turn while making sure Jumpluff could survive the turn. Since Jumpluff had no retreat cost, you could swap it out for an undamaged Jumpluff sitting on your bench if you knew your opponent couldn't deal 90 damage to it during their turn. These factors combined to make Jumpluff decks arguably the best strategy at the time, abusing broken time space. A stadium, which lets you evolve Pokemon the turn you put them into play. When combined with multiple copies of Claydol, which lets you put up to 2 cards from your hand onto the bottom of your deck and then draw until you have 6 cards in your hand, you could consistently find all the pieces of the strategy you needed to succeed. The deck was even capable of running tech options like Luxray G level X to bring in important Pokemon from your opponent's bench to the active spot, or Shaman level X to boost Jumpluff's survivability. Throughout its time in the standard format, Jumpluff decks consistently performed at many high-level events, and even won the 2010 World Championship in the Junior Age division. And at number 7, we have Scyther, a competitive powerhouse from the early days of competitive Pokemon. This Pokemon has 2 relevant attacks bolstered by a fantastic 70 HP and no retreat cost. For 1 grass energy, Swords Dance made it so that if you use Slash on your next turn, it would deal 30 more damage. For 3 colorless energy, Slash deals 30 damage. Now, while this Pokemon is very underwhelming by today's standard, Scyther was far above average as an offensive Pokemon in the earliest days of the competitive TCG. Dealing 30 damage with a single attack was actually quite good, as the game was far slower and you could afford to set up a 3-hit KO over multiple turns using plus power to get 2-hit KOs on 70 HP Pokemon. Slash was also very easy to enable with the use of double colorless energy, since it allowed you to meet a 3 energy cost with only 2 energy attachments. Slash was such an efficient attack with double colorless energy that it didn't even play grass type energy to use Swords Dance. It wasn't just Scyther's offensive power that made it a competitive mainstay at the time, as it also provided fantastic utility thanks to its more than reasonable HP, free retreat cost, and invaluable fighting type resistance. Having 70 HP meant it had a good chance at not being 2-hit KO'd by the likes of Electabuzz's Thunder Punch or Magmar's Smog before other damage modifiers. Thanks to its fighting resistance, which reduced all damage dealt to it by fighting types by 30, Scyther completely walled Hitmonchan, the most common offensive fighting type. Scyther's fighting resistance meant it paired up excellently with the best Pokemon of the format, Lickitung. Lickitun's massive HP and ability to paralyze opponents with its Tongue Wrap attack meant that dealing with it outside of using fighting types was incredibly difficult. And Scyther stopped these fighting type Pokemons in their tracks. Since these 2 Pokemon mostly had colorless energy in their attack costs, the deck could also take advantage of powerful Psychic type Pokemon like Mewtwo and Mr. Mime. This Pokemon was everywhere in the early days of the Pokemon TCG, and easily deserves its spot amongst the best grass type Pokemon. And taking the number 6 spot, we have Celebi Prime. This Pokemon saw play because of its Forest Breath Pokepower. Once each turn, if this Pokemon was your active Pokemon, you could attach a basic grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. Now, Celebi Prime actually went unplayed for most of its time in the standard format since no good partners existed alongside it. This changed with the release of Mewtwo EX. This card warped the competitive landscape around it due to how strong of an attack X-Ball was. For only 2 colorless energy, X-Ball dealt 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. X-Ball was so strong at the time that it warped the metagame around it. Your deck needed to be good into Mewtwo EX decks for it to be competitively serviceable. Usually, this meant you played your own Mewtwo EX since it had its weakness to its own type. If your opponent had a Mewtwo EX with 2 energies attached, you could use your Mewtwo with 3 energies attached to KO your opponent's Mewtwo due to the psychic weakness. Celebi Prime gave players an easy means to attach 3 energy to their Mewtwo EX in a single turn, letting them just jump on an opposing Mewtwo. If your opponent KO'd one of your Pokemon, you could promote Celebi, use its Pokepower to attach an energy to Mewtwo, then attach a double colorless energy to Mewtwo before retreating for the KO with X-Ball. While Celebi Prime's interaction with the Mewtwo EX mirror match was certainly a large part of its success, it's not the only Pokemon that appreciated having extra energy acceleration to it. Tornadus' Hurricane attack cost 3 colorless energy and dealt 80 damage with the added effect of moving 1 energy card from Tornadus to one of your other Pokemon. Much like with Mewtwo, Celebi and double colorless energy allowed you to use Hurricane as early as your first turn. and start putting on immediate offensive pressure. Celebi was also played alongside Terrakion as a means to set up Retaliate in a single turn when paired with a fighting energy from hand. If one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn, Retaliate dealt 90 damage for 1 fighting and 1 colorless energy. Terrakion became a staple Pokemon with the release of Darkrai EX, a very frequently used Pokemon that Retaliate could one-hit KO. In fact, Celebi, Mewtwo, Terrakion, and Tornadus were almost always played in this same deck. This strategy came to be known as CMT for each of the first letters of the Pokemon's name. CMT was an incredibly dominant standard deck up until the release of Darkrai EX, which ended up replacing Celebi in these kinds of decks. Either way, it was in part due to Celebi's utility that CMT decks were so powerful for an albeit brief time in the standard format. And at number 5, we have Yanmega Prime. Almost every piece of text on this card was relevant towards its competitive success. Firstly, its Insight Pokebody lets you use its attack for no energy cost if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. For 1 grass and 1 colorless energy, Linear Attack dealt 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. For 2 grass and 1 colorless, Sonic Boom dealt 70 damage, but didn't apply weakness or resistance. The attack costs on this card are pretty irrelevant, as many decks playing Yanmega played no grass energies, and would always just manipulate their hand size to match their opponents using cards like Copycat or Judge. For all intents and purposes, Yanmega Prime was the perfect early game attacker. Linear Attack allows you to spread damage around your opponent's board to enable your other Pokemon to take KOs they otherwise might not be able to. If your opponent had an evolving basic like Magnemite or Tepeg stuck in the active spot, Sonic Boom made that Pokemon a free prize card. Keep in mind that you didn't have to attach energy to Yanmega in order to do either of these things. While this card worked away at your opponent, you could continue setting up more powerful late-game Pokemon like Magnezone Prime or Lantern Prime. Once your stronger attacks were set up, Yanmega's free retreat cost made bringing it up into the active spot to attack a trivial matter. In the fairly limited 2011 Worlds format, this card was one of the best Pokemon in the entire game. Even as more sets entered the standard format, Yanmega never really fell out of the metagame until Pokemon EX were released. And at number 4 on the list, we have Decidueye GX. This Stage 2 Pokemon had the Feather Arrow ability, which lets you put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon once each turn. For 1 grass and 2 colorless, Razor Leaf dealt 90 damage. For 1 grass energy, its once per game GX attack, Hollow Hunt GX, lets you put any 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand. While Razor Leaf isn't a good attack for Stage 2 Pokemon, and Hollow Hunt has only decent utility since it's your only attack for that turn, Feather Arrow was a game determinative ability, and a large reason as to why Decidueye GX saw competitive usage. Generally, in the Pokemon TCG, abilities that let you put damage counters onto your opponent's Pokemon are either restricted in some way or difficult to access, since letting you place damage counters however you want can greatly skew damage trades in your favor and is very difficult to interact with. Feather Arrow meant that if you got multiple Decidueye GX set up in a single game, something made trivial thanks to Forest of Giant Plants, you could easily KO low HP basic Pokemon without even having to use your attack for the turn. In the mirror match, having 3 Decidueye GX in play meant you could KO your opponent's Rowlet before they could even evolve. Against decks solely reliant on high HP Pokemon EX, Feather Arrow could turn the middling 90 damage from Razor Leaf into an attack that one-hit KO'd a 170 Pokemon like Rayquaza EX. The versatility of Feather Arrow meant that Decidueye GX could be played alongside a bevy of strong attackers. Some notable partners included Tapu Koko for its attacks that spread damage across all of your opponent's Pokemon, Ninetales GX for its great utility and solid attacks, and Zoroark GX for efficient damage backed up by a powerful draw engine. Decidueye GX was an excellent Pokemon that put up consistent results in a wide variety of strategies for almost all of its time in the standard format. And at number 3, we have Golisopod GX. This Stage 1 GX Pokemon has the First Impression attack, which costs 1 grass energy and deals 30 damage plus 90 more if it became your active Pokemon this turn. For 1 grass and 2 colorless energy, Armor Press dealt 100 damage and reduced all damage Golisopod GX took from your opponent's attacks by 20 during their next turn. Lastly, Crossing Cut GX had the same energy cost to deal 150 damage and switch Golisopod GX with one of your bench Pokemon. This card is yet another very efficiently attacking offensive threat. Dealing 120 damage for only a single energy meant that this card put an incredible amount of early pressure on your opponent, especially if their strategy relied on lower HP basic or evolving Pokemon. Thanks to Guzma, a supporter that lets you switch your opponent's active Pokemon with one of their bench Pokemon while also letting you switch your active Pokemon, you could take out important utility Pokemon like Octillery or basic Pokemon like Eevee before they could ever evolve into a higher HP one. Even popular evolved Pokemon like Garbodor were in range to be knocked out by first impression. Even without Guzma, Floating Stone made switching between different Golisopod GXs every turn easy by removing its otherwise prohibitive 3 energy retreat cost. While first impression's ease of setting up was a large reason as to Golisopod's success, its other 2 attacks were both fantastic tools to have at its disposal. Armor Press was easily powered up by double Colorless Energy, dealt reasonable damage, and could help Golisopod GX avoid getting 2-hit KO'd by an opposing Golisopod's first impression in the mirror match. Armor Press could also be used to knock out lower HP Pokemon or already damaged Pokemon if switching around the first impression wasn't possible. Crossing Cut GX, while only once per game, gave Golisopod GX the ability to one-hit KO many basic Pokemon GX if it had a Choice Band attached. Since the tool card boosted the attached Pokemon's damage by 30 against Pokemon GX or EX, Crossing Cut would deal 180 damage, enough to KO the widely used Tapu Lele GX. The fact that Golisopod GX wasn't relied on any abilities also meant that it could be paired alongside Garbodor. Its Garbotoxin ability prevented either player from using other abilities, which could often slow down opposing strategies to a crawl if they were heavily reliant on them. In these kinds of game states, there's no card you'd want more than something which attacks so efficiently as Golisopod GX. That's not to say Garbodor was the only Pokemon that Golisopod worked well alongside though. Like many other Pokemon GX, Zoroark GX provided fantastic draw power with its trade ability to bury your opponent in card advantage, while First Impressions puts them on the back foot. For a majority of its time in the standard format, Golisopod GX was a top tier threat you always had to be wary of. And at number 2, we have Genesect EX and its partner in crime, Virizion EX. These cards were always used together in this same deck outside of very rare circumstances, and each contributed to the incredible competitive success of the other, so it only felt fair to put both of them on the spot on this list. Let's start things off with Virizion EX. Its Verdant Wind ability meant that your Pokemon with grass energies attached to them couldn't be affected by special conditions like poison or sleep. For 1 grass and 1 colorless energy, Emerald Blade deals 50 damage and lets you attach up to 2 basic grass energies from your deck to one of your Pokemon. Moving on to Genesect EX, Red Signal lets you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon whenever you attach a Plasma energy from your hand to it. For 2 grass and 1 colorless, Megalo Cannon dealt 100 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon and 20 damage to one of their bench Pokemon. It's quite easy to see what made these cards so good together. Emerald Slash sets up 2 grass energy onto a Genesect EX, which can then allow you to attach a Plasma energy during your next turn to whatever Pokemon you wanted with Megalo Cannon while spreading a little bit of damage around the board. Notably, Virizion EX had a Muscle Band attached to boost its damage by 20. The combination of Emerald Slash and Megalo Cannon could 2-hit KO opposing Virizion and Genesect as well as the widely played Yveltal EX. If something couldn't be 2-hit KO'd or you desperately needed to knock out a problematic Pokemon in a single attack, you could attach a G Booster to Genesect EX. With a tool card attached, Genesect could use the G Booster attack to deal 200 damage and ignore all effects of the defending Pokemon, but at the cost of discarding all energies attached to it. The downside to G Booster wasn't actually that bad, since you could retreat Genesect for free with the Sky Arrow Bridge Stadium in play, and then use Emerald Slash to attach 2 energy from the deck. While Virizion and Genesect were fantastic attackers, their abilities also played a significant role in their competitive success. When Genesect EX was first printed, Red Signal was one of the only ways to force a specific Pokemon into the active spot. Red Signal was so strong at this point that other Team Plasma decks would occasionally run 1 to 2 copies of Genesect just for this ability. Virizion and Genesect decks, being one of the few strategies with access to Red Signal, gave them a significant edge over other decks at the time. Virizion's Verdant Wind was also hugely important during the standard format. Usually, status conditions are very rare and not worth worrying about. However, this standard format was full of decks using the combination of Hypnotoxic Laser's Guaranteed Poison and Verbank City Gym's ability to deal 30 damage to opponent's active Pokemon in between turns. If you couldn't retreat your Pokemon to cure the poison, as status conditions are automatically removed when a Pokemon leaves the active spot, Hypnotoxic Laser and Verbank City Gym would result in your Pokemon taking an extra 90 damage over the course of 2 turns. Virizion EX outright prevented this extra damage from happening, which was so powerful that even decks using Rainbow or Prism Energy, which counted as all types of energy when attached to Pokemon, would play a single copy of Virizion just for Verdant Wind. When you combine these 2 individually powerful cards into the same deck, you get a dominant force in the metagame. At the 2014 World Championship, Virizion Genesect decks put up 5 of the top 8 spots, 3 of the top 4 spots, and the finals was a mirror match. And at number 1, we have the previously mentioned Vileplume, which prevents both players from using item cards with its irritating pollen ability. When this card was first printed in the Ancient Origins expansion, it became the centerpiece of various decks looking to set up the item lock as quickly as possible with Forest of Giant Plants. Since this Stadium card lets you ignore the usual restrictions of evolving Grass-type Pokemon, it was possible to set up the item lock as early as your very first turn, as you could play supporter cards on your first turn during this time. Finding all the pieces to evolve an Oddish into a Vileplume was fairly trivial thanks to Professor Sycamore and Shaman EX. This setup was played alongside hard to KO attackers like Jolteon EX, whose Flash Ray attack prevented it from being damaged by basic Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. Vileplume strategies then gained a Grass-type attacker with the release of Decidueye GX. In the expanded format, Vileplume has seen play alongside a bevy of attackers like Zoroark GX and Sceptile GX before the release of Rowlet Exeggutor GX. Even if you can't cheat out Vileplume earlier than it's supposed to be, item lock is so fundamentally strong that many players find it worthwhile to use. If your opponent's deck is reliant on common item consistency pieces like Ultra Ball, Battle Compressor, Trainer's Mail, or any other of the many widely used item cards in both its time and standard in the modern expanded format, then Irritating Pollen can single-handedly win you the game. Although this card has never won a World Championship, it still sees consistent play to this day in the expanded format, due to how game determinative its effect is. There's a reason why the Pokemon Company rarely prints abilities that lock your opponent out of items, and Vileplume being the best Grass-type Pokemon in the TCG's history does a good job of showcasing why.